Why were you hesitant about taking the medications?
Because I knew that going on biologics increases your risk of Hodgkin's lymphoma. All these things. I knew that they all have side effects, and I knew that the side effects of prednisone were were brutal. And I was trying to resist all of this. So yeah, I was just, I, I, I didn't want to have to become one of those patients on a ton of meds and you're on them forever. And I just felt like that was the end of my life. It was very humbling to be educated as a physician that my knowledge of the way I thought a lot of things wasn't helping me. It's been now 6 months off medication, and I've
Mm.
been on Lialda since 2008. I would describe that eating raw carrots has made me like laugh out loud. Even since I was a kid, I could never eat apples. Like apples always gave me diarrhea, always, and pears. And today, I'm eating apples and pears, and it's just I'm sitting going, this is impossible. Oh, this is low FODMAP, and you're like, yeah, your microbiome is so different now that it's not an issue. And it's funny because I have a massive smoothie every day, which I
Mm.
never thought the volume of my smoothie is like a liter plus. And when I would watch you all, I'm like, there's no way I'm able to take a liter down. And you're like, oh, you can. When I talked to the GI docs about what I was experiencing, how I was incontinent and I had mucus issues, and they said to me, and I went to like 5 different GI docs, and they said, you need to learn to live with this.
Mm.
And you have scar tissue there, you're going to be incontinent. And there was a sense of like, this can't be right. As compared to losing your colon and other issues like this that are so extreme, you only have one colon ever. And to give this a try, to just say, like, why not a year, 6 months to a year, not that it'll ever be that long, of like, let me try this because if this works, I get my life back.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of IBD Heal, a podcast brought to you by High Carb Health. I'm your host, Shakul, and today I'm joined by a very special guest, Dr. T. Welcome to the show. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks. Oh, it's a pleasure to be here. So I'm Dr. T. I'm a medical doctor in the US, and I've had ulcerative colitis for 15 years. And thanks to working with you and this program, it's very surreal for me that I'm medication free and feel like I did many, many years ago before this all happened. So again, great to be here.
Yeah, this is one episode that we're very excited to share with you because obviously Dr. T is practicing medicine in the US and he has been working with us for a little while now, and we're going to go through his whole story. But what we want to start off with is talking about how does it feel? I mean, you had this for 15 years, so that's a long time. It's a long time of your life to be, we've talked about this a lot in our meetings about how much of your life this has taken up. And what is it like to have gotten rid of ulcerative colitis?
So it's really an amazing question because I think after so many years, it's almost becomes ingrained. And so for me, not having to run to the bathroom, and not that there isn't a bit of like PTSD, but I have to remind myself that like there's no rush, everything's fine. And it's it feels like being let out of prison. It's really very surreal, and it keeps me like smiling all the time. So grateful. Really, it's unbelievable.
And can you compare your life even before colitis, but just talk about some of the things that you had to go through in those 15 years compared to what life is like now for you?
Oh my goodness. It was a very, very challenging 15 years. I mean, how should I put it? I was having accidents all the time and had to wear protection all the time. And honestly, I remember when it was at its worst, I remember just, I couldn't even walk like 4 feet without having an accident. And I remember I was crying. I was like, I kept almost saying, like, why is this so? I was like, I almost was trying to talk to my body. I'm like, why are you so angry? It just was so, just, I it was like indescribable. The how what was happening. It was just, you know, I couldn't believe my life became so small, from trying to live a life to like walking 4 feet. I remember walking with my son who was like 4, and we were at Walmart, and I was like, I've got to run to the bathroom, and he was all confused. And I said, we have to go right now. Like, I don't have a choice, and he was like, what's wrong? And I was like, oh, it was just very challenging. Yeah, it was, yeah, I don't have words. People that have this know how brutal it is.
Yeah, absolutely. And compare that to the last, I think, 6 to 9 months that you've
Right.
been symptom and medication free. How do you feel? And you mentioned your son, and we've had a few discussions around what you've been able to do with your son recently. It's just night
Sure.
and day.
Well, to be able to go on a flight and to go visit him, and to not have to always like, I need the aisle seat because I need to beeline it to the bathroom, and to not have to worry about protection, just so freeing. Like, the world just feels so much larger. I can't even, it's very like, I even turned to him and I said, how surreal is this? And he's like, I know. I'm like, yeah. I said, we went walking like all day around where he was. And I said, I haven't had to ask you where the bathroom is once, have I? He's like, yeah, it's really weird. I'm like, I know. Very, very strange. 15 years is a long time.
Yeah, and so he's probably known that's all he's known about you for his whole
Yeah.
life.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. Oh,
Wow.
no. Yeah. At one point, he turned to me. He goes, hey, can we go down, to the stadium and go watch a game? I'm like, yeah, sure. Let's just do it. Let's get in the car and go with no planning. That's impossible. Yeah, very weird.
Amazing. Yeah, so as you can see, guys, this is life-changing stuff, and Dr. T has transformed before my eyes. I've been working with him for a little while. We'll talk about how this all started with him, but it's been quite an amazing journey to see where he's come from to where he is now, and the change in him has just been fascinating for me to see. But let's go to the beginning, Dr. T,
Sure.
and let's talk about how this started for you. And as a medical professional, how must it have felt to have been given the diagnosis? So let's start with the symptoms that you initially experienced, and then we'll go through the diagnoses and what happened from there.
Sure. And, please stop me at any point. So this all started in 2008. And I was going through a really stressful time in my life. And all of a sudden, I just had this sort of cramp, and I had to go to the bathroom. And then every 15 minutes after that, it just didn't stop. So I was going like 40 times a day, and it was just pouring out of me. And I was like, this isn't right. Like, as a physician, I'm like, what is going on? And I immediately went to a GI doc, and he's like, we need to scope you. And I was like, oh my goodness. And he scoped me and he said, you have pancolitis. And basically said, we need to put you on everything. We need to put you on biologics. We need to put you on, like, you name it, you got to go on it. And I, even at that time, I resisted, and I didn't want to go on prednisone. And I just, so the doc goes, well, we'll put you on Xifaxan. And
Hmm.
Xifaxan is used for traveler's diarrhea. And I said, fine.
Can I interrupt you for a second there, Dr. T? Uh, why were you hesitant about taking the medications?
Because I knew that going on biologics increases your risk of Hodgkin's lymphoma, all these things. I knew that they all have side effects, and I knew that the side effects of prednisone were were brutal. And I was like, I was trying to resist all of this. So yeah, I was just, I I I didn't want to have to become one of those patients on a ton of meds and you're on them forever. And I just felt like that was the end of my life. And so I was calling all these physicians that I went to medical school with, and they all were like, yep, and I was completely, I was completely incontinent. Like it was that bad. Like it was just, it was a disaster. Like I couldn't hold it for a moment. And um, I finally gave up when it wasn't getting any better after 6 months. And I went on a course of prednisone that finally just cut the numbers down to a much more. I mean, oh, and at the same time, I was having to do the prednisone and the mesalamine enemas. Like it was all. Then it was just mesalamine, prednisone, enemas. My God, the enemas. That was such just not even being able to hold an enema. Everything. It was just brutal. And then honestly, getting severe thrombotic, thrombosed hemorrhoids from all of this. They got a fecal calprotectin. It was like 400, and it was just, it was the whole thing was just so I like all of a sudden this was my entire life was this,
Mm.
you know. Anyway, and my diet consisted of basically because I didn't know what to do. Basically my diet, as much as it sounds crazy, was tuna fish, bananas, and bagels because I thought somehow that was going to make it better.
Mm.
And just the mucus pouring out of me the whole anyway, and I thought somehow that was, bread was simple and tuna fish was basic. I thought, like, oh, it's really simple stuff.
Mm.
Then just to give you a quick sense, at that point, I was like, let me try this probiotic called VSL3. It was like this super powerful probiotic. And then I tried the SCD diet and nothing. And then it quieted down again. And then I was like, oh, well, I've lost some weight. I better get more protein. And I started eating a ton of eggs. And it just roared back like a I can't even. I was like, oh, I must have brought on that. And I knew enough to see like clearly the eggs brought that on. And it was just, and then I tried to do some research that it was the sulfa in the eggs. And I was like, food is so confusing right now.
Mm.
So I'm giving it flavor if that's what it was like. And I can hold there for a moment, but that's like the battle was on. And that was, I was trying to
Mm.
tackle, and it just, ooh,
So take us through the years
sure,
between when you were diagnosed, just briefly, between 2008 and I think 2021 or 22 when you got hold
sure.
of, well,
So
our work and what you went through and what you tried and the different
I,
medications that you were given.
sure. So in a nutshell, I tried some pretty intense things. Um, I went to this clinic and they said, we can fix this. And it was echoing of a bit of this program, but it was all about buying their supplements, not eating for a week straight. And the stress of all that made me lose a tremendous amount of weight and then flare again.
Mm.
So I was hopeful, and then I finally dropped out of that program, which was again echoes of the right idea, but the wrong implementation for me completely. And I then read some articles and I tried something very non-traditional with some doctor support. Is I tried something known as hyperbaric oxygen therapy,
Hmm.
which was a very surreal experience and had the right idea because in a way I got better, but it was brutal and I had rhabdomyolysis and was urinating blood and whatever it was clearly this echo of there's got to be a way. If clearly just getting oxygen into my colon was causing this, something there's it's almost like the truth was there, but I couldn't figure it out yet. Um,
Mm.
and at that point, my life really consisted of eating bananas and potatoes, rice protein powder, and massive amounts of sunflower butter
Mm.
because I thought I needed my protein. And I managed to just be on relatively low dose Lialda, and I thought I was doing pretty well. And I got scoped at I think it was around December of 2020. And he said, you still have ulcers throughout your colon. I had to biopsy a lesion, and I don't think it was cancerous. And at that point, he's like, we have a choice. Either you let go now and go back, start on biologics, or you need to go on max dose of the mesalamine and we need to scope you right away. And I said, well, wait, what if we just use the fecal calprotectin as a proxy for that? And when I would, my fecal calprotectin on max dose of Lialda would start to come down into the normal range, but as soon as I started to ease off on the Lialda, the fecal calprotectin would shoot way back up again. And
Mm.
then, just in a nutshell, that takes us to, where I ended up getting COVID and noticed some heart issues. And then I was like, there's a rare chance that mesalamine can also affect your heart. So I said, I need to stop all my meds. And I said, if I'm going to stop all my meds, I've got to find a solution
Mm.
because and that's when I finally, through reading and discussing, found you all.
Mm.
And so you all caught me at a
Mm.
brutal time in my life, which is I was immediately stopping all the meds, not ready for anything, getting over COVID, and
Mm.
I dropped this on your lap to try to help me, and it was a rough time. That was a rough
Mm.
intro,
Yeah,
but I
absolutely.
feel
I
out of that.
believe I believe also you had some complications after taking the COVID vaccine as well, didn't you?
Yeah, it's all been a challenge in terms of my heart rate, and yes, it's been challenging. It has been a very fascinating journey to say the least. Absolutely.
Definitely. So talk about there's a few things I want to discuss with you about, when you decided to contact us and you found out about us. What were your initial thoughts when you saw some of the work we were doing? And then I want you to discuss your first conversation with Shamiz when you were thinking about starting.
Sure. I remember watching the testimonials and going, this is doable. I'm going to be the exception, but this appears to really finally be the answer. I just it seemed like this, it all kind of made sense, why the other things hadn't worked. Um, but again, there was this sense of like, yeah, but there's no like, yeah, sure, I'm sure it'll work for mild UC, but not for a long one like me for 15 years. And so, and again, the discussion I had, with Shamiz was great, and it I guess the takeaway was this wasn't going to be easy, but it never is. But I'm like, but that it was doable.
Hmm.
And so that like, okay, like, and again, I think that's the takeaway. At least, by the way, just to sort of riff on this, that this wasn't an instant cure. Like, no, this is not. And I think it's almost like, no, this isn't a diet plan. This is a
Hmm.
lifestyle change.
Hmm.
But at least it was a target to aim for. But I knew that book alone, I'm like, I need support to do this, no doubt. Absolutely.
Yeah, 100%. And so let's talk about, okay, so you decided that this was the way that you wanted to go about tackling your issue.
Right.
And as a physician, as a medical doctor, when you got some of the information, how did some of that information tie into some of the things that you'd learned? And what about some of the other things that maybe made you kind of sit up and go, whoa, what's this all about?
It's amazing how much education I had lacked, where, and we had many discussions about my conception about and the country's obsession with protein intake. And I remember listening and talking to you all, and this not even hesitating when you're like, stop your protein powder. Because I wasn't essentially not eating meat already. And you're like, you're you're doing protein powder and you're doing a tremendous amount of roasted nuts. And I was like, oh yeah, but this is incredibly healthy. And as a physician thinking that, and you're like, that doesn't really sound healthy to me, And as I read all the stuff, I'm like, oh my God, you're right. Who said like having a rice protein powder is a natural food? So that's where I had to rethink what I thought of as like my body needs this much protein. And there was a sense, as my shrink would say, like you've done it this way for how many years, and how's that
Mm.
working for, you know? So again, I describe it that you all it was very humbling to be educated as a physician that my knowledge of the way I thought a lot of things wasn't helping me.
Hmm.
So
It's quite an interesting reflection. Hmm.
yeah, I had some right ideas that I'm like, clearly this has to do with something in my gut. Like clearly between the hyperbarics
Hmm.
and what you're on, clearly this has to do when most physicians say you can eat whatever you want, just eat a healthy diet, food doesn't impact this. And reading all the materials and going, no, 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 food has to have an impact on this. But clearly I hadn't solved the puzzle. I'm like, but you all seem to have solved it. And I was like, well, I don't know what I was like, but I'm already doing everything right. And what was bizarre for me, and we can come back to this later, but as soon as I stopped, the day after I stopped the rice protein powder and the sunflower butter, I started to feel very strange. And I was like, this doesn't make any sense. And you all are like, yes, it does. You know what I mean? Like, and therefore I was like, okay, you guys think so. I trust you guys on this.
Yeah.
And one last comment is,
Hmm.
uh, I guess a few months before I stopped eating bread because I had just read that there's a lot of issues around this. And I stopped bread and it was torture. Like I literally went to the ER because I felt so awful. And they're like, I thought I was going dying. And it was like a withdrawal. So I'm just saying all these things that I'm like, I had no idea what I was really doing to myself.
Hmm.
I know it's a lot, but it's been so surreal.
Yeah, you've been through I mean,
The brat
a
diet is what we
serious
tell people.
journey.
When you have some sort of inflammation, you do bananas,
Hmm.
rice, toast,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it's bread. I'm like, oh, bread can't be bad.
Yeah. I mean, you're told to eat all the white stuff, aren't you? When you have,
Right,
yeah.
right. It's less stress on your colon, and it's not saying, oh, that stuff is evil forever. And we can talk about that, but in this current state that my body was in, bread wasn't helping, clearly. Anyway, so that's what it was. Very
Yeah,
surreal.
yeah, absolutely. And the other thing I want you to discuss with the audience is the information you get about how the body heals, the physiology of how the body heals. I want you to talk about that a little bit from medical perspective, what we talk about, when we're talking about how there are certain toxins released, and there's a lot of research regarding this that has been coming, and it's growing too, around when you eat certain animal proteins, it putrefies in your bowel and releases this toxic gas called hydrogen sulfide, which creates endotoxins in your gut. And you know, talk from someone who's you obviously to become a doctor you need to have a certain level of understanding of research. So talk to the audience about what you learned around the physiology of how the body heals. It's a big
Okay.
one.
So in Western medicine, most doctors won't argue with the fact that normally when you have an injury, the body will heal. When you have a cut, it will heal. And in general, for most things in general, physicians agree don't do things to impede the healing process. So if you get a cut, we wouldn't have people like, you know, pour acid on it or, rub it intensely. It's sort of like the message we would usually tell patients is keep it clean and leave it alone. And in a way, we say that, but when it comes to other things, that's not always the case. So I guess what I'm getting at is there is this idea that the body can heal itself. But of course, Western medicine believes that's true for certain things, but especially, of course, not for autoimmune diseases. Like, there's never an agreement that, oh, autoimmune, like by definition, the conception is autoimmune diseases will not heal themselves. It's an autoimmune and the body is attacking itself, and we have to stop the body from attacking itself. But that's why if someone's got gastritis because they drank alcohol, we're like, don't like do spicy food for a day. Like give your give the surface some time. Don't keep irritating it. Don't keep, let the give the body space to heal itself, you know. And there is some basic agreement, of course, that for example, a fever isn't awful. Like a low
Mm,
grade fever is actually designed to denature the viral proteins which allow the immune system to kill that faster, because initially it was like, oh, immediately you have a fever, take Tylenol. And now at least Western medicine says only take Tylenol when you have a very high fever and you're at a risk for dehydration and other major complications. But that a low grade fever is not a bad thing. And in a way, you all will smile because you're like, yeah, the body is smart and it's trying to already heal itself. Stop stopping that, let it do what it wants. So does that sort of get to what you're getting at a bit?
yeah, and that's something we talk about a lot when you first start the program. We go through the education. We say the body heals the same on the inside as it does on the outside, but the cause is different, right? When you got damage on the outside, there's a physical damage. When you got damage on the inside, there's a toxic damage. But the same message applies. And I like how you said, keep it clean and leave it alone, because that's been our message for what to do with the inside of the body since we started working with people on this, is you want to keep the internal environment clean and leave it alone. And if you can do that, just like the body heals on the outside, it can heal on the inside. And obviously you achieved it by doing that and following that process.
No, it's been very challenging to sort of sense make a lot of this. So
Hmm.
in terms of what the body goes through when it is healing, and that's very different than what we talked about in Western medicine.
Hmm.
You know,
Yes, I think
yes, you have
that's something we can touch on as well, because it's part of what we're discussing around how does the body heal, and in terms of the way the medical system thinks about certain symptoms, we have a completely different explanation of what these symptoms are, and so maybe you can talk about that too.
that is so difficult and mind-blowing as a physician that I would go, "Oh, I think I'm going to flare." And you're like, "You're misinterpreting this." And to not see it was so challenging when you're like, "You stop saying it's a flare. This is your body doing what it needs to do right now."
Hmm.
But I immediately go to the worst place possible, like, "Oh my God, this is a flare. I need prednisone." And your perspective is just be patient. This takes time. You had 15 years of damage. Like, be patient. And that's physicians are not the best. Physicians are the worst patients. I'll admit that in a heartbeat, So, yeah, absolutely. Just, and really, as a physician, it was so mind bending when I started having what you would describe as detox symptoms. And I kept saying
Hmm.
and
Or healing
overanalyzing,
symptoms.
yeah, and healing something like this makes no sense. I
Hmm.
don't understand. I can't make sense of this. And you're like, read the book again. And he goes over all of these. And I just had to have faith. And I'm like, okay, and we can talk more about that, but it just so surreal. Or a reframing of how to see everything.
Absolutely, because when you go to a doctor and you've got certain symptoms, they're automatically seen as this is bad thing that's happening, and we need to stop that. Whereas, as we talked about, we always like to think about how does this make sense in terms of logic, right? So when you fall over and you get hurt, as the body's healing, it doesn't feel good,
Right.
right? And we know that, and we accept that because we understand that's a healing process. However, when the body is healing from the inside and it doesn't feel good, and there's some normal healing symptoms that are going on, we can't seem to accept that, and primarily because we don't understand what's happening.
Yeah.
Uh, but talk about that, because you are going to talk a little bit about your detox process or your healing process. I think I'm trying to reframe from detox to healing, because detox
I
comes with
agree
a
with you.
particular connotation
I
around. There's a lot of detox programs and things like that around,
agree.
and
I agree.
I think if we kind of talk about detox slash healing that the body's trying to undergo, and when we get symptoms, it is really a process of healing that is happening. And I want you to describe your experience of going through the healing slash detox process.
Sure. And I'm really glad, sometimes, as you said, you look back and everything kind of, that there was a way that life unfolded.
Hmm.
I'm glad I did the hyperbarics because that was my first glimpse into thinking about things differently. Because when I did the hyperbarics, this was not giving myself an infusion of bizarre medications. It was just high level oxygen. And what
Hmm.
the oxygen was doing in this one case was killing anaerobic bacteria that shouldn't have been in my colon. And it was lysing those bacteria. It was just with oxygen, for goodness sake. It was essentially trying, as you would say, to do healing, but in a very non-natural way, like incredible amounts of oxygen being forced under incredible amounts of pressure. And I remember having fever and chills. And I was like, why should I have fever and chills from just getting some oxygen? And it was because, as you would say, things were in my body that needed to not be in my body. And as they were dying and being killed, they were releasing endotoxin in this case, and I was feeling awful.
Hmm.
And so therefore I was mentally like, okay, be ready for something that won't be expected. And I remember as soon as I stopped the rice protein powder and the sunflower butter, the next day I started to have chills and I was cold and I was shaking and I would have intense fatigue for an hour and then I would feel fine again. And then it was intense fatigue for another hour. And I was like, it's like I'm having the flu. But it was that, and again, that's the normal body's. But what's amazing is, yeah, there's a normal physiologic response that isn't the virus, but when the body gets a virus, this is really all these cofactors that are the body's activating that give you fatigue, nausea, chills. It's how the body wants you to stop running around, save energy, and get into a healing mode in a sense. Like that's your body like building up things and fighting off something. And so it was so surreal. And I would write down the list and I would sit there going, "Oh, I'm having X." I was like, "What? Oh, it's like I thought that literally there was something wrong with me. It's completely separate from just what I was going through." Because I'm like, "Oh, I'm having the worst head. Oh, it's a headache." And I was like, instead of freaking out about the headache, I'm like, "You're gonna have funky stuff." So I'll just give you a sense. Can I just list briefly the kind of things I experienced, or do you want me to wait on that?
Yeah, yeah, you can do that.
So intense, short-lived fatigue that is not just like I had a long day. It was like, I'm going to pass out, and then it literally fall asleep for like 30 minutes and then feel like I'm okay again. So these intense waves of fatigue, nausea, chills, headaches, scalp acne, um, sore throat, congestion, abdominal cramping, weird sleeping, even discomfort when I urinated. And I was like, this, it was almost like made me laugh how I kept going, why is this? Oh, it's a like your body's choosing this way to help the process. So, and there was a time I was going 15 times a day, and normally I would be like wanting to reach for medication instead of just like as you would say, stay hydrated, see how you feel tomorrow. And then tomorrow it was better again. And you're like, this is your body's going to do what it needs, it's going to do. And I was like, okay, you know? So that was,
Yeah.
I know it was a lot, but
Yeah. And I think
and
one
thank
thing
goodness
that's
for I'm sorry, thank goodness for the testimonials
hmm,
because they prepped for that. Because I was like, oh, they had that too. That's right. It wasn't, you know what I mean? So that was very helpful. The testimonials were phenomenal.
yeah. One thing we talk about, and it's very important, is when you have the knowledge, there becomes an absence of fear because fear is just an
Mm.
absence of knowledge,
Mhm.
right? So that's why we want to teach our clients, and that's why it's very important to, and we'll talk about this as well, like the difference between having some support and trying to do it on your own. But oh, are you still with me? Yep. And
Oh, yeah,
so,
absolutely. Yeah.
yeah, sorry, it looked like you froze for a second. But when you have that understanding about what's happening and why the body's creating these symptoms. It's so important to understand why the body's creating these symptoms because then you go, I know why this is happening. And yes, it doesn't always feel great, but I know why it's happening and I know the purpose behind it. And so I can accept it.
And I forgot to mention the biggest one, which was the weight loss
Hmm.
and dropping down to 100 pounds. That was pretty intense, you know? And,
Hmm.
but again, reading about other people that experience the exact same thing. And there's a sense of like, it's a journey, put your seatbelt on and get ready for
Hmm.
the ride. And
Hmm.
it's like, you want your life back and you don't want to live, and I know many people that are, look, I'd rather have my colon taken out, or I'd rather, continue to eat whatever I want. And it's a choice you just decide to make of like, no, I don't want to be on a biologic and I want to keep my colon. And I was like, there's got to be a way to do this. Has to be. So
Absolutely. There is.
thanks for saving my
Um,
saving my colon.
yeah, absolutely. Um, talk about the program and the support aspect of it. Because when you can discuss the situation that you're in with somebody who's seen this with more than 1,000 people now, what did you find like if you tried to do it on your own compared to having the coaching?
Oh, goodness. Uh, I would never not, I would always use the coaching. The book is great. The book is extremely draconian and in many levels stress inducing because I was like, you can't do this. And if you do this, and I think you all are able to couch it in a way that's much more comfortable and palatable. And yeah, there's no hesit I wouldn't for anyone who's read this book and you're like, this sounds great, but no way. I'm like, talk to them. And I've talked to my patients about this, saying, talk to them. You really want that support because in the beginning, it feels very surreal because in the beginning you're not even that hungry and you're like, how can I get this many calories? And oh, I was obsessing so much about caloric intake and oh my goodness. And but you all were so great about like, look, we'll just use this app. You'll see what you're getting, we'll know what you're not. And there was a sense of like, you know get some lab tests, we'll watch for
Mm.
things, you know and there's always going to be, I think, some stumbling along the way. So I think as I tell my patients, like recover, and it's funny how I can tell them this, but not myself. I said, recovery is never linear. It's
Mm.
never linear. It's always a bit bumpy because that's just, you'll make two steps forward one day, maybe step back a little bit the next day, but then just be patient and then the progress. So it's the biggest thing with all of this is that you all provide that support where the most critical thing you need is patience. So, because it's not an overnight quick fix, it's not a pill. It's you're removing the things which may be impeding your healing, and the body has a timeline and the way that it wants to recover. So, can we give them a sense of timeline for them? Is that okay? Do you mind?
For you, yes.
Ish?
So, like, I mean, one thing we want to talk about today is Tom's journey is quite an exceptional one. But before we go into timeline, you're talking
Okay.
about diet and
Yes.
how you had the app and how you were tracking everything. And I remember a
Right.
discussion we had where I took you through you'd completed your diet for a few days or a week, and then we went through all the nutrients, and you were wondering how is this diet giving me so much nutrition? And we went through all the different vitamins and the minerals and everything like that. What did you see when you kind of saw all of the different things you were getting?
It was really surreal. Like, I'm so glad we did that
Hmm.
because like, there's no way. They're like, you're not getting your fat. And I was like, I put in, like, and just as a quick comment, it's not a diet, it's a new lifestyle.
Correct.
And with the smoothie in the morning, I was like, I can't believe what I'm getting in this smoothie. Like, how is that? And you're like, it's this, you're, it knows how much is in a banana. And I was like, okay, so yeah, I haven't had a
Hmm.
drop of oil in years. And
Hmm.
it's most people, and again, I don't even bother telling people because they're like, "Oh, how are you alive?" I'm like, I'm gained weight, doing fine. Again, I don't even try to convince other physicians because they
Hmm.
don't believe. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, even when the proof is staring them in the face, isn't it? It's quite that's a surreal thing for me. It's like when the proof is literally staring you in the face and telling you that this is what happened to me, and you still don't believe it. Um, but okay, so timeline. So Tom had a whole list of many different things that he was working on. So his healing took a little bit longer than what we would normally expect for most people. But the majority of clients, they're getting better within that 6 month period. But Tom, st when did you start? Talk about when you start with us, and then we can go from there.
What I want to throw out for people is this is really interesting. And it's even in the book as well. There's like a rate of healing, and some things accelerate that, and some things
Hmm.
can slow it down.
Hmm.
And because I had a complication from obviously related to COVID and other stuff, who knows what it was, I had to be on some prednisone for that. And in a way, and you said it right away, you're like, that's going to slow things down.
Hmm.
And, but in a way, maybe for me, the slowing down for a while wasn't a bad thing. So this is where and not that you, this is way too early to say this, but if you're like, what would you tell someone? I was like, the rate of healing, if it's too fast, it can be slowed a bit,
Hmm.
and it's okay. And so I think as I would even tell my regular patients, I'm like, you know, let's, you've got to be able to get, it's not a sprint, it's more of a fundamental marathon. And it could be a couple months for you or longer,
Hmm.
but you have to be able to be comfortable getting through that. And therefore, I would
Absolutely.
say, then let's slow down, because from the book, it's like if you're just doing straight juices, it's really intense, but it may be
Hmm.
just too much. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I know it's a quick aside, but that we
Yeah.
ended up, it had to get slowed down for me in the middle,
Had to.
which, yeah. And you said that you're like, this is not, this is not failure. You're like, it's just slowing it.
If
And so I was like, okay,
if
let's get,
yeah, if we had gone through the healing as fast as we possibly could have, it would have been dangerous for you. So
yes.
we had to control the rate of healing to make it comfortable enough and safe enough that you wouldn't be ending up in a really bad place. Okay.
I
And
totally,
so,
I
and then
totally
that was
agree
a
with that.
discussion we had a lot
Oh
along the
yeah,
way, a lot of
it was
different
great.
discussions around how do we control the pace of your healing so it doesn't get really, really messy for you.
And that's when at one point I went back in the Lialda and then slowly tapered the Lialda. And
Hmm.
and I love you said, you're like, look, this isn't wrong. This isn't failure. We're just turning the dial a bit.
Hmm.
And you were spot on. You really
Yeah,
were.
we're
Like
we're
think
flexible enough to use all the tools that we have available to us, right? Whether that's a dietary thing, whether that's,
right.
all the different things, whether it's a medical option, like just because we're not fans of medicine for the rest of our life, doesn't mean that there's no place for it and there's no options to use it when necessary to solve a particular problem that we have, you know?
It wasn't necessary that it had to be cold turkey. Like that wasn't, you're like, no, it's let's use the tools we've got that work with
Hmm.
you. And again, it was the sense of this isn't a diet, this is a lifestyle change. So let's gradually taper so you're not like having, a lot of symptoms that you can, because you have to still work. And it was fine. I
Hmm.
never had to stop working. Everything was just a slow process. And as long as I was in the mindset of like, this is, and you were saying, look, as long as you're seeing progress. And it was the one week, I remember it was like 7 BMs a day. And then it went to 6 BMs a day. And it was a slow, and I was literally doing the average. I was literally like trying to I was like, I'm doing 6.2 BMs a day. And you're like, how does that compare to last week? And you're like, it's a little bit better. And you're like, it's the direction we're going. And
Hmm.
so that was brilliant. Really, it
Slow and
was
s-
really, really
there's a lot of wisdom in some of these old sayings, slow and steady wins the
slow and
race.
steady. Yeah.
Yeah, slow and steady. My granddad used to always tell me, Shukul, slow and steady wins the race. And I always take that along with some of my work, especially when with these kind of situations.
I remember when I was doing the smoothies, and I
Mm,
remember when I was still in a rough place, as I would do like maybe one date and maybe two, and I was like, oh, I'm like, oh, it's the dates that are giving me the diarrhea, and you would look at me like, it's not the dates. You're right, because it's like no matter what you is this in a way, it's sort of when you're, I'm sure everyone who has the mindset, probably like I do, you think, how should I put this? Some of it is the food, but some of it is whether it's 2 or 3 dates. but you just feel like, oh my God, what can I do to control this? And you're like, give it time. You know what I mean? In a sense. And now I have so many dates. It's just funny now. I'm like, doesn't matter. Dates. Yeah. And anyway, talking about that, I never could have apples. Like, oh God. And anyway, but we'll talk about this later. You get the
Yeah,
idea.
well, I think we're kind of heading in that direction now because you went through the healing and you went through some of those normal symptoms that happen when you're healing and you understood why they happened, so you accepted them for what they were. And then as time progressed, it wasn't linear, but it got better and better. And I think you do want to talk about how long it took you. And then we can talk about how you were able to kind of eat some of the things that you were petrified of.
There's two things I want to say because you were so helpful. People should hear how great you were. Because I'm stressing out like, oh, this was a little more loose than last time. And I'm like trying to like literally like mentally as a physician super analyze this. And you'd be like, stop thinking about what's coming out of you. And I thought that was brilliant. I mean, I know that sounds so simple to say that, but again, I'm just like really analyzing what's in there and what's coming out. And you're like, just don't think, like, don't worry about that. And I was
Hmm.
like, that's, and I know
Yeah.
that sounds trivial, but you end up worrying like, oh, well, if this is a little looser today compared to yesterday, and you're like, stop, don't, you know what I mean? And it's good to hear someone be like, you're fine. You
Yeah,
need that.
well, you can only control your inputs.
I loved that. You said that was so great. You can't control this, let it go, which does tie into the other comment I have to make is during this time, I really did learn a lot about mindfulness and meditation.
Hmm.
And really, I'm sure as you always talk about in all of your coursework, is the mental game does matter.
Oh yeah.
And I'm just saying, so you were 1,000% right on that, and learning to sort of laugh and being like, learning to kind of like, yeah, body's doing what it needs to do. And I know that's just such a different mindset of like, oh my God, I'm flaring. I'm just being like, that's, but when you've had it for so long, you just like, there's a lot of fear,
There is.
so
Yeah.
because we slowed it down, and I think it's helpful for people to hear this, that you're like, oh, this is really doable. And it gives people, because I was like, oh, I'll be fixed in a week, 2 weeks, 22 months.
Mm.
But I am so proud of those 22 months. You have no idea. Oh my God. And, walking every day. And it's been now 6 months off medication. And I've
Mm.
been on Lialda since 2008.
Mm.
So my entire 40s, I was on Lialda, my entire 40s. And to not be on Lialda, it felt like walking a tightrope without a net. I'm like,
Mm.
how can I be off meds? And that's really spooky when you've been on it for so long.
And how does that feel as a doctor as well? Because, a lot of your training would be around like, especially with these kind of diseases, like you cannot get off your meds otherwise, and then to not be on them and to be thriving without them, how does that make you feel?
Well, I mean, my GI doc hasn't contacted me yet because there's it. I would say honestly that they think that probably have very poor judgment. Like they're probably going to say, look, if you're not taking Lialda, you're going to flare. And that's it. That's what they're going to, you're going to flare and we're going to have to put you on biologics.
Hmm.
And I'm like, how long? And they'll be like, well, you've got to, so that's my philosophy. I'm like, well, let's see how long I go. Like, okay.
Hmm.
Um, right, we can talk about maybe a follow-up colonoscopy, but that's a separate issue. So
Yeah.
yeah, the perspective is, I even spoke to some people about this, and there's they probably that I'm some incredible fluke. Like
Hmm.
there's no way. Yeah, there's no way. This doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. And that's why we're so, these stories are so important because if there was just one odd story like this and or there's just only Shamiza's story, oh, that's just a fluke. But now there's 150 of them almost,
Yeah.
you know? And every time it's just more and more proof. Like each case study is proof, and that's why it's so important that we document all these cases is that you can show, hey, this is not a fluke. This is working for, you know, so many different people, young people, old people, different races, different ethnicities, different sexes. It's just all the like you can't say like you look through all the different people that we work with. You can't say, oh, there's a trend here that it only works for, you know, Indian people who are in their 20s, like Shamiz was,
Right, right.
yeah.
Because I'm in my 50s, and I was like, well, it won't work for people in their 50s. No way.
Hmm.
Really? I'm like,
It's
oh, only
never,
when you're young and you have great healing when you're young or something. Like,
yeah.
absolutely.
Definitely. So now the next thing you mentioned, and it's a great kind of segue from where you were at. So now you've kind of like healed your body, and you were so scared of eating certain things. Talk about those things that you were scared of eating, and that you just thought, "Mm, if I eat this, it's going to be the end of me," compared to what you're able to do now.
I would describe that eating raw carrots has made me like laugh out loud. Oh my goodness. Just surreal. And but I know that the healing process is probably still going on. And because it's only been 6 months off meds. And I know, so I love that with your program, you have a nice sequence. Like you wouldn't say start eating raw carrots right away because you're still not healed yet. Because in a way, it's not that, let me just sort of rephrase this. The process, it's there's two parts. One is to get out of the body's way, to let things heal in a way. And then once things are healed, because you know it's like a cut that's first healed now. You can't, like, if you hit the when you first have a wound and you hit on it really hard, it's still like getting stronger. And so for me, I know that if I push a little too hard and get too excited, which I end up doing, and having, like, I'll eat, like, I eat for a while, for even a few weeks ago, I was eating like 5, 6, 7 carrots a day. And it was great. But then all of a sudden I was like, oh, I think it's maybe a little much. And then I learned you have a beautiful way of, like, go back to this, just have cooked vegetables for a while and then introduce it again. So there's a beautiful, like, dial, like cut it back a bit, let it heal some more, and then go back up again.
Mm.
So that's what it's like. And even since I was a kid, I could never eat apples. Like, apples always gave me diarrhea, always, and pears. And today, like, I'm eating apples and pears, and it's just I'm sitting there going, this is impossible. Oh, this is low FODMAP. And you're like, yeah, your microbiome is so different now that it's not an issue.
Mm.
So that's what's all been so strange. Like, and I have to tell you, eating like some carrot and lettuce and cucumber is mind-blowingly delicious. Just that. Oh my God. It really is.
Yeah, especially when you couldn't eat any of that stuff for such a long time.
Yeah.
I can't even imagine just eating bananas, tuna, and bread for however long you were eating it
Years.
for. Years. Yeah, it's just
Years.
yeah. Yeah. You think changing your diet is hard? Just try eating that for like that much time.
And I really don't. And it's funny because I have a massive smoothie every day, which I
Mm.
never thought, the volume of my smoothie is like a liter plus. And when I would watch you all, I'm like, there's no way I'm gonna have to take a liter down. And you're like, oh, you can. Like, it just becomes like, once that becomes your mindset of, like, every morning, like, I can do it unconsciously. Like, I know exactly what I put in every time. And it's like every day. I just, and it's not like, oh, I have to do this. I'm like, I like, it's great. And I don't miss really anything that I'm not having. Like, I don't
Mm.
miss, it's not a diet. Like, I'm good with this. This is fine. This is great to have your life back. How
Absolutely.
much is
Yeah.
that worth?
How much is that worth? Absolutely. And
Um,
I think we can kind of because we're kind of running out of time a little bit, but let's just talk about what your life is like and some of the advice that you'd like to give people that are watching this from a not only from a personal level, from a medical level, from the mindset of a physician. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what your life is like now and what you'd like to tell people who are watching.
I would tell them that, yes, feels very different from what standard Western medicine is. And I totally understand that, which is, when I talked to the GI docs about what I was experiencing, how I was incontinent and I had mucus issues, and they said to me, and I went to like 5 different GI docs, and they said, you need to learn to live with this.
Mm.
and you have scar tissue there, you're going to be incontinent. And there was a sense of like, this can't be right. And all I can tell people is to get to not have to wear, protection from having accidents and mucus coming out. I mean, I've had mucus coming out of me for a decade. And I just thought I didn't know what it was in the beginning. It was really scary. I'm like, okay, I guess this is the way it's going to be now. So I guess my recommendation would be, given as compared to losing your colon and other issues like this that are so extreme, you only have one colon ever. And to give this a try, to just say, like, why not a year, 6 months to a year, not that it'll ever be that long, of like, let me try this, because if this works, I get my life back. And yes, there's always going to be trade-offs. Like I would say, if you're like, I have to have meat and I have to have eggs, I there's always trade-offs in life. And I would eat ear of newt if that's what would give me my life back. And I would say in the program itself, as a physician, I may have been a little too cavalier, is get your meds checked. I mean, I'm sorry, not your meds checked, get your labs checked, excuse me. Your That matters. And I was like, oh, labs, everything's fine. You're like, no, this is very different from your body. And you really do want to make sure that levels are where you want, that your sodium's where you want it, that you're not getting extremely anemic, that you're not getting super dehydrated. It's better safe than sorry. Get your labs checked. Okay. And have patience that, you know, we may have, this is the classic, and I wish I had learned this years ago. We somehow have a magical preconceived notion of what it's supposed to be like, of how fast this should heal, versus letting your body do its thing to whatever timeline that might be. But if
Hmm.
you see improvement, then just hang on and see it not as like a diet, but see it as like it's a new, different lifestyle. And I mean, that's what I
Hmm.
would recommend. And if it feels like it's too much, that the process can be like a dial, turn it down a little bit. Like maybe temporarily go back on a low dose of your meds if that just allows you to feel a bit better, to stick with this.
Hmm.
So, I mean, that's again, part of me still doesn't believe this. And really, it may take a very long time because, 15 years is a long time, but not being on Lialda and waking up, not having abdominal pain is very weird, and bloating and going like, that feels flat, you know, but then not
Hmm.
freaking out if maybe a day where it feels a little achy. And you're like, then it's a new way to see things. So I'm so grateful for you all to help me see things in a different way. So very grateful.
Yeah, absolutely, mate. Did an amazing job, and yeah, I mean to go through what you went through, it wasn't just colitis. I mean, we didn't get to touch on some of the other issues because we're focusing mostly on the gut, but
Sure.
like heart inflammation and other things that you had to kind of overcome along the way as well. Um, it's full credit to you. I'm exceptionally honored to be part of your journey. Very, very proud of you. And fully congratulations. My favorite part of the show is Dr. T, you now have a life after colitis. Congratulations.
I am so grateful beyond words. I cannot thank you enough. Truly.
Fantastic. Well, hey, you guys, I hope you found that inspirational. I have been inspired working with Dr. T for the last almost 2 years, and uh, it's been a real pleasure. And for you guys watching and listening to this show, I hope you've learned something from Dr. T and his journey. And if you're watching this on YouTube or you're listening to this on the podcast, please subscribe to the channel so that you get notified of all our testimonials and other videos that we're going to be producing in the future. If you haven't given this video a like, please do so because it helps us reach more people. And if you have any questions, please leave a comment down below in the comment section and we'll get to it as best as we can. Apart from that, for everyone watching and listening, I hope you have a good day and make sure that you eat plants and lots of them. You take care.